All right, let's jump right into this one. Today, we're looking at a fascinating explainer that basically takes these high-level, abstract spiritual concepts and turns them into a highly practical, engineering-level framework for your actual mind. We're leaning heavily into the teachings of figures like Baba and David Phillips. And what's super cool here is that we aren't looking at spirituality as some, vague retreat from reality. No, we're looking at it as literal operating system, a practical toolkit for navigating the absolute most chaotic parts of your day-to-day life.
So, we are essentially running a complete diagnostic on your consciousness today. We'll kick things off with the baseline check, move into service and love, pinpoint what we call the judgment bug, reframe our view with Earth as a gym, apply the A/B process software patch, and wrap up by removing the final thorn. Right into Section 1, the baseline check, measuring the soul.
Okay, picture this for a second. Instead of a doctor wrapping a cuff around your arm to check your blood pressure, imagine they place this crazy new diagnostic sensor on you to measure your core spiritual health, like right in this exact millisecond. What number do you think would pop up on that screen right now? It's kind of a confronting thought, isn't it? I mean, we are so incredibly used to precise, binary measurements when it comes to our physical health, but our internal, emotional baseline, that's usually just a murky guessing game, right? Mostly based on how stressed we feel before we've had our morning coffee.
Well, according to the source material drawn from David Phillips and Bubba, your frequency isn't just some vague wellness vibe, and it's definitely not just a buzzword. It's actually the foundational metric of your operating system. It is literally the operating speed of your consciousness. And the core argument here, that this one single metric ultimately determines your entire life experience, period.
And this brings us to a really massive distinction, the difference between endlessly trying to satiate your desires versus actually achieving pure, high-frequency contentment. See, the modern default is to think, well, I'm unhappy because I don't have this one specific thing, and once I get it, boom, my frequency will finally rise. But you guys, that is a total trap. Satiating desire is literally like fighting a hydra. You cut off one head and two more instantly grow back in its place. True contentment is fundamentally different. It's about resting in a high-frequency state without aggressively pushing reality away in disgust or desperately pulling it toward you. You're just existing in that high frequency.
Moving right along to Section 2, Service and Love, the hierarchy.
Now, this part fundamentally challenges what we've all been taught about being a quote-unquote good person. You'd probably think constant sacrifice and altruism are the absolute peak of spirituality, right? But the actual hierarchy of energy plays out a bit differently. First, you have service without love. This is considered deplorable because it operates at a massive energetic deficit. Then there's service with love, which is perfectly acceptable and hits a medium frequency. But, and here's the catch, the ego is still quietly keeping score in the background thinking, oh, look how good I am. So the absolute highest, most divine state, it's actually love without service. Think of an exhausted mother rocking a newborn baby at 3 a.m. She's not performing some calculated act of selfless service for humanity. She's operating purely out of natural love with zero ego attached to it. Any helpful actions she takes are simply a natural byproduct of her being in that incredibly high-frequency state.
Which leads us to Section 3, the judgment bug, system crash.
So if we know our target metric is high-frequency contentment, we have to track down the ultimate virus that causes our entire system to crash. And that virus, it's judgment. Anytime you look at reality and declare that it is fundamentally broken or wrong, your vibratory rate absolutely plummets. Think of it like shoving a massive rock into a garden hose. Judgment completely blocks the flow of your high-frequency energy. We always mistakenly think our anger is punishing the person who wronged us, but honestly, they're probably sleeping perfectly fine. Meanwhile, you are the only one choking on that rock in your own hose.
This is exactly why understanding the game-changing difference between analysis and judgment is so crucial. Let's say you're dealing with a thief. Analysis is just observing the objective data. You know this person steals, so you lock your doors, right? You set firm boundaries. That keeps you perfectly safe, and your frequency remains totally intact. Judgment, on the other hand, is that awful emotional contraction where you decide you actively hate them. That hatred, that's just self-inflicted radioactive luggage. You can completely protect yourself from a thief using cold, clear analysis without ever dropping your frequency into the toxic trap of judgment.
Let's head into Section 4, Earth as a Gym, Stress Testing.
We're constantly sold this idea that spiritual peace looks like lying on a spa table with cucumber slices over our eyes, completely undisturbed by the world. But here's the reality check. Earth is a gym, not a spa. Friction is literally the entire point. You can't build physical strength without lifting heavy things, right? We tend to think the universe is broken whenever we face a struggle. But those incredibly difficult, frustrating people in your life, they are actually the heavy weights specifically provided to help you build your forgiveness muscles. If every single weight in the gym was made out of styrofoam, you would never, ever grow.
There is this incredibly profound quote from Baba that really drives this home. It invites us to view our antagonists, the people who drive us crazy, as actors. Actors performing a vital, sacrificial role in the movie of our lives, just to help us grow. Because think about it, without a formidable villain, there's no conflict. And without conflict, it's a terrible, boring movie. The villain acts as the necessary catalyst for the hero's evolution. In a very real way, they're doing the ugly, thankless job of spotting you while you lift. But what happens if you refuse to lift the weight and instead you just want to hate the villain? Well, imagine you're driving a car down a super dry dirt road. You're kicking up this massive cloud of what we'll call karma dust. Now, as long as you keep your frequency high and keep driving forward, that dust stays in the rearview mirror. But when someone cuts you off in traffic, the actual event isn't the trap. The trap is slamming on your emotional brakes to wallow in judgment. That is exactly what allows all that karma dust to settle entirely on you and your system. You've got to keep your momentum moving forward to leave the karma behind.
Section 5, the A-B process, the software patch. Okay, so how do we actually do this? Here is the exact practical technique to pull yourself out of a low-frequency nosedive right when your blood starts boiling. This is the A-B process. Part A represents the mind, your cognitive tools, your mantras, your spiritual concepts. Think of these as the starting blocks for a sprinter. You absolutely must use these tools as starting blocks to generate your initial resistance and momentum. But to actually run the race, you have to transition into Part B, which is simply being. The issue is, so many of us spend years just endlessly crouched in the starting blocks, rigidly repeating our mantras over and over without ever actually pushing off to run the race. The second your frequency starts to rise, you have to quiet the mind, let go of the blocks, and just experience the peace.
And finally, Section 6, the final thorn, system reboot.
This brings us to what is undoubtedly the most profound, layered metaphor in all this source material. Imagine you accidentally stumble and fall into a vicious, dense thorn bush. Your skin is just covered in these painful, worldly attachments, anxieties, resentments, fears, you name it. To get them out, you manage to find the biggest, sharpest thorn you can possibly reach. This giant thorn represents a high spiritual concept, like a powerful mantra or the concept of God. You rely heavily on this spiritual tool to meticulously dig out and remove every single one of those worldly anxieties. It works. It relieves your suffering entirely. But here is the absolute genius of the metaphor. True, unmediated freedom requires you to ultimately drop that final thorn of spiritual ego, too. Once you're free, you actually have to throw the giant thorn away. Because if you hold on to it just to show off your spiritual identity to everybody, guess what? You are still clutching a thorn. The ultimate goal here is radical non-attachment. The notes detail this incredible story where Alexander the Great actually threatened an ancient enlightened sage. He sent a heavily armed messenger demanding the sage come to the palace, or else have his head cut off. But when faced with this ultimate, terrifying worldly threat, the sage operated purely in Part B. He demonstrated absolute non-attachment by offering literally zero resistance. He simply looked at the messenger and said, "Take it." He was carrying absolutely no radioactive luggage. So to help us inch just a little bit closer to that state of radical freedom, the material offers one final powerful psychological technique. I want you to trace your deepest anxiety down to its absolute worst-case scenario today. Follow it all the way down to the bottom and just keep asking yourself, and then what? Are you finally ready to drop your resistance, look at the absolute worst the world has to offer, and just say, take it? Because the absolute second you drop that resistance, the rock is finally removed from your hose, and your frequency instantly rises. So tell me, what thorn are you still clutching today, and are you finally ready to throw it away?